Immediately. So let me just first quick, so I'm just relating it to the theme of this symposium. How does smart grid contribute to climate change? So the idea is electricity and transportation are dominant sources of greenhouse gas emissions. These are well-known factors. Then addressing, if you switch to cleaner and renewable power sources like solar, wind, you're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they need these are located far away from current sources, plus they are going to be small scale distributed, so you need to integrate into the current system, so that's why it's important. Then second, you're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if our electricity and energy usage is basically has less wastage and it improves efficiency. And third, we are interested in smart grid because we are trying, on the transportation side, we need to go into electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, etc., etc. So that means that's how it contributes. And a grid connects sources to users, so that means we have to have newer, for wind, geothermal, that means new distributed sources, both large-scale utility and small distributed sources which have to be integrated into the current grid. And second, you have to improve your efficiency. And third, when you put all those together, you need to continue to have reliability. So that's the trade-offs, and that's why smart grid comes into picture. Okay, so I'll skip this one. I should not. Okay. Just to talk about, in talking about the money, there's a lot of money in smart grid. Most of you know about it, but just to highlight some of these things, federal government has set aside something like $54 billion to upgrade the national grid. In October 2009, the largest electric grid modernization investment involving $8 billion was announced. Another 100, they funded about 100 smart grid projects with $3.4 billion of DOE dollars and $4.7 billion in that, plus another $620 million came about in November 2009. Okay, so the individual utilities have got pretty large sums of money. For example, $209 million for Potomac. Idaho got $94 million. Detroit Edison got about $5 million for energy storage. Okay, so there's lots of, and not only the government money, but there's lots of venture capital funding. Here is the data on how many $1 million, like it's gone up to over $200 million last year. 2007, about $200 million in venture capital funding. Again, I give some numbers. Optimal Technologies received about $20 million towards development of software for managing electric grids, and the $20 million for SmartSync for developing wirelessly communicating meters, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of private investment also happening. So there is lots of interest in it. So the question is, okay, what is smart in smart grids? I mean, Joydeep talked about it. One is that what he called the physical layer. That is technologically what is needed is digital communication on top of the physical distribution network. It includes digital switching networks, remote sensing, fault detection, devices for automatic fault repair, and end-use intelligent home appliances, kind of consumer appliances. So that's the physical layer. But more importantly, it's functionally, what does it do? Functionally, what is smart grid? First is, you have a whole set of entities which need to coordinate. So it's basically improving transactive coordination of the system. You put in different energy sources, it has to be managed. You have all those intelligent devices, they have to be managed. So it's basically to improve transactive coordination. And it also helps distributed resource interconnection, including, that is, all the new sources have to be connected into the grid. So it enables to do that. Second, it also allows a new resource agent to be either a producer or a consumer. Like you have a solar panel, part of the time, night you're not, daytime you're generating, nighttime you're a user, and so on and so forth. Windmill, when the wind stops, you're a consumer. When the windmill runs, you're a producer. So you need to manage that. Okay, so that's second. And third most important thing is demand response to dynamic pricing. Right now there is no price signal. Like for example, as a homeowner, I get one utility bill, one rate for whatever, a year or whatever is the period. So I have no idea what's the marginal cost. So it's never related to the marginal cost of power production. So when I don't get those signals, I'm not going to optimize. Okay, so that's the point. So now if you can get dynamics principle, what's the marginal cost of production? If I can respond, right now there's no way of my responding, nor does the utility can respond to it. So it helps you to demand response to dynamic pricing. And then third is for agents to program. It's not only that I do it physically or response, I can automate this dynamic response to price signals through intelligent end-use appliances. Then finally, distribution company, which better service reliability. When you're coordinating all of this, you need better service reliability. Those are the key aspects of functional smartness, and smart grid is going to help them do it. Okay, these are not only one more additional feature is previously it was only accident or natural disaster which was contributing to outages. Now increasingly we are vulnerable to deliberate attacks through mostly cyber attacks, and I was surprised that there are so many. If you look at the graph of rise in cyber attacks, it's pretty sharply increasing. So we need to really, and power outages are expensive. Again, I have some numbers here. Like for example, an hour of power interruption costs something like $41,000 in a cellular communication industry, and $2 million in a credit card operation, and $6 million in a brokerage operation. So the cost of outages are high, so you need to compensate for that. That smart grid helps you to do that too. Okay, now the question is, what's the economic value proposition? How does smart grid contribute, justify investments in it? The first thing is demand side management. That is, electric grids are designed for peak loads. They kind of designed for peak loads, and most of the time they are not utilized. If you look at national average load factor, the number is 46.5, and Linda will tell me for MSU's power plant is 39 or 38%. So basically about 60% of the time the power capacity is lying idle. Now if you have good, in fact, I was looking at this number, if you could use this idle capacity, we can meet 73% of national transport energy required if you have enough plug-in hybrid vehicles. So if you can manage that, it's going to work. So the idea here is, if you have dynamic pricing, and which allows consumers to switch from peak load operations to the balanced load, you basically avoid tons of investments in new capacity, and that's essentially what is the value proposition. One, that's the dynamic proposition. Second, okay, here is some realistic, how much can we really achieve just by switching around the peak demands is something like 8% by 2030 in residential, about 9% in commercial, and industrial about 8%, because they're already kind of optimizing much more than residential. So that's roughly what's the realistic estimate. This is from every report. Then the second efficiency is it's essentially a transactive grid. That is one value. The second is, because we are so much concerned about transaction costs, the industry was vertically integrated, and as a result there are lots of inefficiencies. If you can lower transaction costs, it's going to allow lots of transactions, essentially, which are mutually beneficial transactions. Right now, this is very difficult to operate. Like for example, I have a solar plant, I can't connect it because of all the concerns. So it might be beneficial, but it never occurs because of transaction costs. Okay, so the idea is that once you start reducing transaction costs with this intelligence and smartness, lot more mutually beneficial transactions occur. As a result, overall efficiency and overall value goes up. Okay, so that is, you can allow within facility, that is within the house, like he said, laundromat, okay, I can do it at 2 o'clock versus something that's emergency, I'll run it now, and so on and so forth. So you can do within facility, within microgrids, and macrogrid transactions, and between storage and generation. So if you can make all these transactions, then it will improve the total value. Then the third is the renewable integration. We have lots of benefits from renewables in terms of environmental benefits, but to add it to the grid, there are lots of transaction costs. Again, that's because renewables tend to be smaller scale, they tend to be geographically distributed, they are less controllable, then there is mismatch between demand and supply, plus they are intermittent. When there is wind or when there is sunlight, you get the power, otherwise no, and so etc. And plus, so you need some kind of a plug and play interconnection, two-way transmission and storage. All of those have prevented renewable integration. So if you can integrate that, then it will get you the environmental benefits. That's the other value propositions. Environmental benefits are the value proposition. And okay, the point here is there are two different aspects. One is improving, reducing the transaction cost. The other is connecting renewables, utility scale renewables which are far away from current demand centers. That is traditional investment. Okay, so those two have to be separated. So the point here is the smartness helps you to address reduce the transaction cost of integrating renewables, while simply connecting where the wind is a different issue. Like here is the idea is that here if you look at it, here are all our transmission lines, but most of the high wind areas are right in the middle. So as a result, you need to connect the wind areas to these demand centers that are out there. That's the idea. Same thing if I took Michigan, most of our good wind sources are along the coastline here, and you need to connect these to our demand center. So that's a different issue. Okay, but along with that, the smartness is required to address the transaction costs. Okay, so that means what? Transactive efficiency is going to be the major value driver in smartness, and which also means one hand technology development is important, but on the other hand you also have to have good institutional structure which allows this transaction efficiency to occur. You might have all the great technology in place, but if the institutions don't allow this transaction efficiency, you're not going to succeed. I mean, for example, if you don't have dynamic pricing and consumer choice, AMI will not. I mean, it just sits there. Okay, so it doesn't help. And similarly, without appropriate pricing, renewables will not get integrated. So we need to have institutional changes. And similarly, utilities we don't have incentives for utilities. Utilities get paid per kilowatt hour sold. So there is no incentive for them to actually promote energy conservation. Again, some attempts have been done on demand, DSM and so on and so forth, but the idea is you need to strengthen those incentives. If you don't do all of this, the value proposition goes away because it is basically transaction efficiency. Okay? And so we need a lot more transactive flexibility without endangering reliability and price stability. So that's kind of the thing. So, but you know, I mean, there are lots of agencies involved, so you need to really, institutional changes have to occur in all of those dimensions. Okay? So the question is on, okay, here is, for example, the one way, for example, forcing renewable usage is through mandates. Okay, so you have renewable portfolio standards in different states. I mean, you can get this. Most of the states have some kind of form of renewable portfolio standards, but at the same time, interconnection standards have not been developed in all states. Like this is the EPA survey 2008. Only a few of the states have, like the yellow states have favorable interconnection standards. Some actually have unfavorable interconnection standards. Most of the southern states seem to have unfavorable interconnection standards, and many don't even have. All the white states don't even have an interconnection standard in place. So that means just to get these things, you need to really get this picture right, and you should be having all of them yellow before you move into renewable integration. So that's institutional change. And I'm thinking about, okay, on one, also there are issues on real-time pricing. I mean, for example, you say day ahead or hour ahead pricing as a way of sending the price signal. Right now I get no price signals, and if you can get those price signals, I can adjust. The smart grid dream is that consumers will vary their demand and usage in response. I get the signals and I decide on when to run my washing machine, or when I run my computer, or at least I have a program which does that. And as a result, you are going to save efficiency, you are going to get returns. But what happened? I mean, this is the PCG right now. They are facing a problem. They got the money, they started installing, and there was a huge consumer backlash because all of them saw that new smart meters prices went down. I mean, one is because there was investments in the thing which got included in the rate base, plus there is weather factors and etc. But the point is, you get these price signals, and if you don't optimize, you actually going to see a huge, I mean, essentially, if you don't optimize, the price signals are going to be extremely magnified. So right now, when I'm using most critical, when I need the most demand, when I need my electricity most, when it's an extremely hot day, that's when I need my air conditioning, and that's when the prices are the highest. So if I don't optimize, then I'm going to get a more volatility. So as a result, in fact, they had to stop, they have paused their smart meters because customers offered, and there was even a court case. That's the second. So here is our dream, but this is what is happening. Same thing. It also means if you have capacity, it's going to be the smarter people or well-educated and who have the capacity to invest in all these programmable meters who are going to get the benefits. The unsophisticated, poor, or unhealthy people who are going to be hit with the largest bills because they are not optimizing, and so there are lots of equity issues which also need to be considered. Plus, we have talked about speculative volatility. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. Just because once you have this transaction, somebody can start gaming the system. So that's something. And sorry, I think I'm running out of time. All right. So a couple more quick issues. So in terms of business models, there are three options. One is the utility makes all the smart grid. Its idea is here is the value to be captured. Who captures the value and who makes the investments? So if you think about the business models, three. One is utility makes all the investments, captures all the value, and passes on to the consumer through average prices. Essentially, utility manages your control for you. Okay, that it's feasible with smart meters and capacity, but the question is control and privacy. The other option is consumers make all the investments, optimize in response to just price. They get only price signals from the utility. They optimize, they capture the value, and they make the investments. And there are lots of issues on that. Like for example, we know that people fail to make investments in CFLs where it's easy. So this, whether it's going to be effective or not is a question. And discount rates are much higher. In the sense the consumers tend to be a lot more myopic, so the effectiveness might be suffering. The third is third parties make investment, like you can incorporate smart grids into your mortgage and you get all the appliances together and pay the mortgage, or some other entities which will do energy efficiency for you and capture the money. So those are the three different models. Which one will work? That's a debate. That's something that's again an institutional design issue we need to work with. Okay. So the idea here is what can MSU play a role in this whole smart grid movement? We are kind of a mini city with our own power plant. More than that, we are also a CHP plant. So we can be a great experimental lab. And we are a local monopoly. We supply all the power. And our price signal, at least others face an average electricity price. Our average electricity price is zero. At least the price signals right now is zero. That means we have lot more ability to play around with the system. So in terms of the technology, we can be a nice experimental place for testing out different technologies and develop those technologies. And also we can actually look at dynamic pricing and consumer risk. This provides a beautiful lab for doing that. We have very price sensitive, yet very technologically sophisticated student body, and they are all digital natives, unlike the older generation. The typical household owner tends to be older and not that good on technology, while students are extremely sophisticated and they are budget conscious. So they have incentives to actually optimize. So we can really test those out, and we can run, and we can also do education and training effectiveness and so on and so forth. So there's lots of scopes in doing that work within MSU. And renewables integration, small scale, again we have started with the PV plant and so on and so forth. So that we can test and run those. And then again, PHEV is supposed to be a big thing. So again, we have our own MSU fleet. If you can switch some of it to plug-in and then look at the modeling and how can we optimize that, lots of scope for that. And institutional and policy analysis, the business models testing, and then workforce training. So all those are open areas for MSU, and that's what we're trying to explore. Okay, I'll stop there.